We live in an era where much of the information that we receive comes at us in short sound bites or from sources that can be difficult to discern what is and is not fake news, or through stories that have been sensationalized for the purpose of creating clickbait. All of this is a hindrance to our ability to understand complex social issues like human trafficking. Sensationalized images like these might be good ways to get our attention, but they really do not reflect the reality of what human trafficking is in real life. And therefore, if we have images like these in our mind, and that's how we shape our understanding of things like human trafficking, and then we look out in the real world somehow expecting to see it and find it and then don't, we might be tempted to think that this is something that's not actually happening here. And then we miss what is actually happening right in front of us. And so I want to share with you today a more realistic and holistic perspective of what human trafficking looks like here in Kansas City. My observations come from several years of working in the Kansas City anti-human trafficking movement and from my collaborative relationships with nonprofits, survivors of trafficking, law enforcement, advocates, community leaders, and also through extensive research. I teach a course on human trafficking to criminal justice majors and social work majors and ministry majors at Mid-American Nazarene University and also at UMKC. I have up here on this screen two common phrases that I hear when I speak in the public about human trafficking. They are misconceptions, and so I want to unpack these a bit here today in my talk with you. A common thing that people first want to know when they hear about trafficking is they want to know how many victims there are. And the reason why I think people want to know how many victims there are is because they want to have some sort of sense of how big and how prevalent is this problem. The problem, however, is not the victims. The problem lies with the offenders, those who perpetrate this crime. Human trafficking is a demand-driven business. The reason why traffickers manipulate and coerce and force victims into trafficking situations is because it is financially lucrative for them to do so. And so therefore, if we want to understand how big human trafficking is, we need to look at the size of demand. In 2013, Arizona State University conducted a study to measure the prevalence of demand in 15 cities around the country, and Kansas City was among them. They posted decoy ads, they tabulated the response to the advertisements and ran them through a statistical analysis. Among their findings, they estimate that on any given Friday night in Kansas City, 14.5% of the adult male population here in our city is actively responding to advertisements for commercial sex. This translates to over 106,000 men. Interestingly, 89% of the responses to the advertisements, the decoy advertisements, came from local area codes. So to some degree, we can infer that for the most part, we're talking about local residents. Kansas City ranked number 2 out of the 15 cities in this study. Please note that this does not mean that we are number 2 in the nation for trafficking, as the popular phrase that I had up earlier states. It simply means that we ranked number 2 among the 15 cities in this particular study. Another analysis in December of 2017 found that the average advertisement for commercial sex in our city generates 1.1 phone calls per minute. It's also worth noting a disturbing component of this demand exists for children. In 2009, the Independence Police Department, in partnership with the FBI, posted decoy advertisements, and the language used in the advertisements very explicitly was offering children for sale. The ads received over 500 phone calls within the first 24 hours of their posting. Even last month, a 64-year-old man from Ottawa, Kansas, was arrested in a sting. He had brought $5,000 to Independence, Missouri for the purchase of a 10-year-old girl. So where is this happening? It's happening in locations of all kinds. It's happening in hotels and motels of all classes, high-end and low-end. Some common spots are the hotels up by the airport, over by the stadiums, down by Metcalf and 435 around the convention center. It's happening in private residences, single-family homes, apartment complexes, even lofts downtown. It's happening in vacant, dilapidated homes. Do you know that we have hundreds of these in our urban core? Many of them are being used for drugs, prostitution, sex trafficking. It's even happening out in the open, on our streets. Last summer, I partnered with a community that was trying to help find their missing 13-year-old daughter. Witnesses had seen her being sold on the streets in broad daylight in Kansas City, and no one had called police. We know that trafficking is occurring in our schools, that many youth are being recruited through our schools around the metro area. It's also happening wherever pornography is manufactured featuring children or in which adults are participating as a result of force, fraud, or coercion. It's happening at truck stops and gas stations and other businesses that act as fronts for trafficking. Our homeless women and youth are particularly vulnerable to sex trafficking. At any given time, it's estimated in Kansas City that we have about 2,000 homeless youth. Advocates working with this population estimate that about a third of them are LGBTQ. This is a disproportionate number. And the reason why these kids are on the streets is because that many of them have run away from abusive home situations, or they've been kicked out by their families citing religious reasons. And these kids are extremely vulnerable to sex trafficking and other forms of sexual exploitation. And they're often purchased by men who want to act out homosexual fantasies in a way that is anonymous and relationship-free. It's happening in massage businesses that act as fronts for trafficking. We estimate that at any given time in our city, there are between 80 to 90 of these types of illicit massage businesses. The typical story of the women who provide sexual activities inside of these involve backgrounds of poverty, typically from Asian countries, where they or their families were approached by a recruiter who offered them legitimate, well-paying employment in the United States. However, upon their arrival here, the script switches, and their identifying documents are taken from them. They are manipulated and groomed, beaten, abused, even tortured, all for the purpose of ensuring that they will behave in a way that appears that they are willing participants in the activities inside these businesses. The reason why traffickers do this is because demand is perpetuated when buyers' self-delusional fantasies about prostitution are not interrupted by reality. It's also happening in our legal commercial sex businesses. There are several local area clubs that have in recent years been involved in cases of sexual assault and sex trafficking. The presence of minors inside of these types of businesses is well documented in clubs throughout our country. And this should come as no surprise to anyone who reasons through why it is that women and girls are trafficked in the first place. So I hope what I have shared with you here today helps you see this issue in a clearer way. Kansas City is not unique in this regard, as the label of being a hub would suggest. Trafficking is happening in all cities around our country, even in small towns and rural areas. And so I urge you to take the few minutes that I have had with you here today, to take this and learn more about trafficking and to take action. There is much work that needs to be done, and there is urgency to it. There are many amazing individuals and organizations in our city that work selflessly and tirelessly to end trafficking and support survivors. And so I ask you to join us. And one step I have for you is I really want to encourage my audiences, whenever I speak to them, to, when you see evidence of one person controlling another, to please report this. If it's the type of situation that is of urgency, perhaps someone's potentially a life is in danger, please call 911. The other option, too, is that you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And so before I leave today, I ask each of you to take out your phone and put this number into it. And next time you see something, please, I urge you to make a call. Thank you.